Natasha N.K.O, 3rd of July, 1636. Reading on from Scott M. Peck's People of the Lie, Chapter 2, Toward a Psychology of Evil. This subsection is entitled The Case of Bobby and His Parents. It was February, in the middle of my first year of psychiatric training. I was working on the inpatient service. Bobby, a 15-year-old boy, had been admitted the night before from the emergency room with a diagnosis of depression. Before seeing Bobby for the first time, I read the note written in his chart by the admitting psychiatrist. Bobby's older brother Stuart, 16, committed suicide this past June, shooting himself in the head with his .22 caliber rifle. Bobby initially seemed to handle his only sibling's death rather well, but from the beginning of school in September, his academic performance has been poor. Once a B student, he is now failing all his courses. By Thanksgiving, he had become obviously depressed. His parents, who seemed very concerned, tried to talk to him, but he has become more and more uncommunicative, particularly since Christmas. Although there is no previous history of antisocial behaviour, yesterday Bobby stole a car by himself, crashed it, he had never driven before, and was apprehended by the police. His court date is set for March 24th. Because of his age, he was released into his parents' custody, and they were advised to seek immediate psychiatric evaluation for him. The aide brought Bobby into my office. He had that typical body type of 15-year-old boys who have just undergone their early adolescent growth spurt. Long, spindly arms and legs like sticks, and a skinny torso that had not yet begun to fill out. His badly fitting clothes were nondescript. His slightly long, unwashed hair fell forward over his eyes, so that it was difficult to see his face, particularly as he kept his gaze riveted on the floor. I shook his limp hand and motioned him to sit down. "I'm Dr. Peck, Bobby," I said. "I'm going to be your doctor. How are you feeling?" Bobby did not answer. He simply sat staring at the floor. "Did you have a good night's sleep?" I asked. "Okay, I guess," Bobby mumbled. He started picking at a small sore on the back of his hand. I noticed that there were a number of such sores on both his forearms and hands. "Are you nervous being here in the hospital?" No answer. Bobby was really digging into that sore. Inwardly, I winced at the damage he was doing to his flesh. "Pretty much everyone's nervous when they first come to the hospital," I commented, "but you'll find that it's a safe place. Can you tell me how you happened to come here?" "My parents brought me." "Why did they do that?" "Because I stole a car and the police said I had to come here." "I don't think the police said you had to come to the hospital," I explained. "They just wanted you to see a doctor." "Then the doctor who saw you last night thought you were so depressed it would be better for you to be in the hospital. How did you happen to steal a car?" "I don't know. It's a pretty scary thing to steal a car, especially when you're alone and when you're not used to driving and don't even have a driver's license. Something very strong had to be pushing you to do it. Do you know what that something was?" No answer. I didn't really expect one. 15-year-old boys who are in trouble and seeing a psychiatrist for the first time aren't likely to be very verbal, particularly when they're depressed, and Bobby was clearly very depressed. By this time, I had had a chance to catch several quick glimpses of his face when he inadvertently raised his gaze from the floor. It was dull, expressionless. There was no life in his eyes or mouth. It was the kind of face I had seen in the movies of concentration camp survivors or victims of natural disasters who had seen their homes destroyed and their families wiped out, dazed, apathetic, hopeless. "Do you feel sad?" I asked. "I don't know." Probably he didn't, I thought. Young adolescents are just beginning to learn how to identify their feelings. The stronger the feelings, the more overwhelmed they will be by them, and the less able to name them. "I suspect you have some very good reasons to feel sad," I told him. "I know that your brother Stuart committed suicide last summer. Were you close to him?" "Yes." "Tell me about the two of you." "There's nothing to tell." His death must have made you hurt and confused, I said. No reaction, except that maybe he'd dug a little deeper into one of the sores on his forearm. He was clearly not able to talk yet in this first session about his brother's suicide. I decided to drop the issue for the present. How about your parents, I asked. What can you tell me about them? They're good to me. That's nice. How are they good to you? They drive me to scout meetings. Yes, that's good, I commented. Of course, that's the kind of thing parents are supposed to do when they can. How do you get along with them? Okay. No problems? Sometimes I'm mean to them. Oh, like how? I hurt them. How do you hurt them, Bobby? I asked. Like when I stole the car. That hurt them, Bobby said. Not with triumph, but with a dreary, hopeless heaviness. Do you think maybe that's why you stole the car? To hurt them? No. I guess you didn't want to hurt them. Can you think of any other ways you've hurt your parents? Bobby didn't answer. After a long pause, I said, Well, I just know I hurt them. But how do you know? I asked. I don't know. Do they punish you? No. They're good to me. Then how do you know you hurt them? They yell at me. Oh? What are some of the things they yell at you for? I don't know. Bobby was feverishly picking at his sores now, and his head had drooped as far as it would go. I felt it would be best if I steered my questions to more neutral subjects. Perhaps then he would open up a bit more, and we could begin developing a relationship. Do you have any pets at home? I asked. A dog. What kind of dog? A German Shepherd. What's his name? Her name, Bobby corrected me. Inge. That sounds like a German name. Yes. A German name for a German Shepherd, I commented, hoping somehow to get out of my interrogational role. Do you and Inge do a lot together? No. Do you take care of her? Yes. But you don't seem very enthusiastic about her. She's my father's dog. Oh, but you still have to take care of her? Yes. That doesn't seem quite fair. Does it make you angry? No. Do you have a pet of your own? No. We clearly weren't getting very far on the topic of pets, so I decided to switch to another topic, which often elicits some enthusiasm from young people. It's not long since Christmas, I said. What did you get for Christmas? Nothing much. Your parents must have given you something. What did they give you? A gun. A gun? I repeated stupidly. Yes. What kind of gun? I asked slowly. A 22. A 22 pistol? No, a 22 rifle. There was a long moment of silence. I felt as if I had lost my bearings. I wanted to stop the interview. I wanted to go home. Finally, I pushed myself to say what had to be said. I understand that it was with a 22 rifle that your brother killed himself. Yes. Was that what you asked for Christmas? No. What did you ask for? A tennis racket. But you got a gun instead. Yes. How did you feel getting the same kind of gun that your brother had? It wasn't the same kind of gun. I began to feel better. Maybe I was just confused. I'm sorry, I said. I thought they were the same kind of gun. It wasn't the same kind of gun, Bobby replied. It was the gun. The gun? Yes. You mean it was your brother's gun? I wanted to go home very badly now. Yes. You mean your parents gave you your brother's gun for Christmas? The one he shot himself with? Yes. How did it make you feel getting your brother's gun for Christmas? I asked. I don't know. I almost regretted the question. How could he know? How could he answer such a thing? I looked at him. There had been no change in his appearance as we had talked about the gun. He had continued to pick away at his sores. Otherwise, it was as if he were already dead. Dull-eyed, listless, apathetic to the point of lifelessness, beyond terror. No, I don't expect you could know, I said. Tell me, do you ever see your grandparents? No, they live in South Dakota. Do you have any relatives that you see? Some. Any that you like? I like my Aunt Helen. I thought perhaps I detected a faint sign of enthusiasm in his reply. Would you like it if your Aunt Helen came to visit you here while you were in the hospital? I asked. She lives quite far away. But if she came anyway? If she wanted to. Again, I felt in him the faintest glimmer of hope, and in myself. I would be getting in touch with Aunt Helen. Now I had to end the interview. I couldn't tolerate any more. I told Bobby about the hospital routines and explained that I would see him the next day, that the nurses would be watching him quite closely, and that they'd give him a sleeping pill at bedtime. Then I took him back to the nurses' station. After writing his orders, I walked out of the building into the courtyard. It was snowing. I was glad of that. I just let it snow on me for a few minutes. Then I went back to my office and became very busy with dull, routine paperwork. I was glad of that also. The next day I saw Bobby's parents. They were, they told me, hard-working people. He was a tool and die maker and an expert machinist who took pride in the great precision of his craft. She had a job as a secretary in an insurance company and took pride in the neatness of their home. They went to the Lutheran church every Sunday. He drank beer in moderation on the weekends. She belonged to a Thursday night women's bowling league. Of average stature, neither handsome nor ugly, they were the upper crust of the blue-collar class, quiet, orderly, solid. There seemed to be no rhyme or reason to the tragedy that had befallen them. First Stuart, and now Bobby. I've cried myself out, Doctor, the mother said. Stuart's suicide was a surprise to you? I asked. Totally, a complete shock, the father answered. He was such a well-adjusted boy. He did well in school. He was into scouting. He liked to hunt woodchucks in the fields behind the house. He was a quiet boy, but everyone liked him. Had he seemed depressed before he killed himself? No, not at all. He seemed just like his old self. Of course he was quiet and didn't tell us much of what was on his mind. Did he leave a note? No. Have any of you relatives on either side had a mental illness or serious depression or killed themselves? Nobody in my family, the father responded. My parents emigrated from Germany, so I have quite a few relatives over there I don't know much about, and I can't tell you about them. My grandmother became senile and had to be put in a hospital, but no one else had any mental difficulty, the mother added. Certainly no one committed suicide. Oh, Doctor, you don't think that there's any chance that Bobby might also do something to himself, do you? Yes, I replied. I think there's a very significant chance. Oh, God, I don't think I could bear it, Mother wailed softly. Does this sort of thing, hurting yourself, does it run in families? Definitely. Statistically, the highest risk of suicide exists in people who have a brother or sister who's committed suicide. Oh, God, the mother wailed again. You mean Bobby might really do it too? You hadn't thought of Bobby being in danger, I asked. No, not until now, the father replied. But I understand that Bobby's been depressed for some time, I remarked. Didn't that worry you? Well, it worried us, of course, the father responded. But we thought it was natural. What with his brother's death and all, we thought he'd get over it in time. You didn't think of taking him to see someone like a psychiatrist? I continued. No, of course not, the father replied again, this time with an edge of annoyance. We told you we thought he would get over it. We had no idea that it might be this serious. I understand that Bobby's grades have gone way down in school, I remarked. Yes, it's a shame, the mother responded. He used to be such a good student. The school must have been a bit concerned about him, I commented. Did they get in touch with you about the problem? The mother looked slightly uncomfortable. Yes, they did. And of course, I was concerned too. I even took time off from my job to go in for a conference. I'd like to have your permission for me to communicate with the school about Bobby if it seems necessary. It might be quite helpful. Of course. In that conference you had, I asked, did anyone from the school suggest that Bobby see a psychiatrist? No, the mother answered. She seemed to have so rapidly regained her composure. I wasn't sure she'd ever lost it. They did suggest he might get some counselling, but not a psychiatrist. Of course, if they had suggested a psychiatrist, we would have done something about it. Yes, then we would have known it was something serious, the father added. But because they said counselling, we thought they were just concerned about his grades. Not that we weren't concerned about his grades too, but we've never been ones to push the children unless we had to. It's not good to push children too hard, is it, Doctor? I'm not sure that taking Bobby to a counsellor would have been the same as pushing him, I commented. Well, that's another thing, Doctor, the mother continued, more on the offensive than the defensive. It's not that easy for us to take Bobby here or there during weekdays. We're both working people, you know. And these counselling people, they don't work on weekends. We can't be just taking off from our jobs every day. We've got a living to make, you know. It didn't seem as if it would be fruitful for me to engage Bobby's parents in an argument over whether they could or could not have discovered available counselling services in the evenings or on weekends. I decided to raise the issue of Aunt Helen. You know, I said, it's possible that my supervisors and I may decide that Bobby will need more than a brief hospitalisation, that he may need a complete change of scene for a good while. Do you have any relatives with whom he might stay? I'm afraid not, the father responded immediately. I don't think any of them would be interested in having an adolescent boy on their hands. They've all got their lives to live. Bobby mentioned to me his Aunt Helen, I suggested. Perhaps she might be willing to take him. The mother jumped in. Did Bobby tell you he doesn't want to live with us? She demanded. No, we haven't even talked about the subject yet, I replied. I'm only seeing what all the options are. Who is Aunt Helen? She's my sister, the mother answered, but she'd be out of the question. She lives at least several hundred miles away. That's not far, I responded, and I'm thinking in terms of a change of scene for Bobby. That distance might be just right. It's close enough so that he could visit you, but far enough so that he'd be away from where his brother committed suicide and perhaps away from some of the other pressures that he's experiencing. I just don't think it would work out, the mother said. Oh? Well, Helen and I aren't close. No, not close at all. Why is that? We've just never gotten along well together. She's stuck up, that's what she is. Although what she's got to be stuck up about, I don't know. All she is a cleaning lady. She and her husband, he's not very bright, you know. All they have is a little house cleaning service. I don't know what makes them think they can go around acting superior all the time. I can understand that you and she don't get on too well together, I acknowledged. Are there any other relatives with whom it would be better for Bobby to live? No. Even though you don't like your sister, Bobby seems to have some positive feeling for her, and that's important. Look, Doctor, the father interjected, I don't know what you're insinuating. You're asking all these questions like you were a policeman or something. We haven't done anything wrong. You don't have any right to take a boy from his parents, if that's what you're thinking of. We've worked hard for that boy. We've been good parents. My stomach was feeling queasier moment by moment. I'm concerned about the Christmas present you gave Bobby, I said. Christmas present? The parents seemed confused. Yes, I understand you gave him a gun. That's right. Was that what he asked for? How should I know what he asked for? The father demanded belligerently. Then immediately his manner turned plaintive. I can't remember what he asked for. A lot's happened to us, you know. This has been a difficult year for us. I can believe it has been, I said. But why did you give him a gun? Why? Why not? It's a good present for a boy his age. Most boys his age would give their eye teeth for a gun. I should think, I said slowly, that since your only other child had killed himself with a gun, that you wouldn't feel so kindly toward guns. You're one of those anti-gun people, are you? The father asked me, faintly belligerent again. Well, that's all right. You can be that way. I'm no gun nut myself, but it does seem to me that guns aren't the problem. It's the people who use them. To an extent, I agree with you, I said. Stuart didn't kill himself simply because he had a gun. There must have been some other reason more important. Do you know what that reason might have been? No. We've already told you we didn't even know that Stuart was depressed. That's right. Stuart was depressed. People don't commit suicide unless they're depressed. Since you didn't know Stuart was depressed, there was perhaps no reason for you to worry about him having a gun. But you did know Bobby was depressed. You knew he was depressed well before Christmas, well before you gave him the gun. Please, Doctor, you don't seem to understand, the mother said ingratiatingly, taking over from her husband. We really didn't know it was this serious. We just thought he was upset over his brother. So you gave him his brother's suicide weapon. Not any gun, that particular gun. The father took the lead again. We couldn't afford to get him a new gun. I don't know why you're picking on us. We gave him the best present we could. Money doesn't grow on trees, you know. We're just ordinary working people. We could have sold the gun and made money, but we didn't. We kept it so we could give Bobby a good present. Did you think how that present might seem to Bobby? I asked. What do you mean? I mean that giving him his brother's suicide weapon was like telling him to walk in his brother's shoes, like telling him to go out and kill himself too. We didn't tell him anything of the sort. Of course not. But did you think that it might possibly seem that way to Bobby? No, we didn't think about that. We're not educated people like you. We haven't been to college and learned all kinds of fancy ways of thinking. We're just simple working people. We can't be expected to think of all these things. Perhaps not, I said, but that's what worries me, because these things need to be thought of. We stared at each other for a long moment. How did they feel, I wondered. Certainly they didn't seem to feel guilty. Angry? Frightened? Victimised? I didn't know. I didn't feel any empathy for them. I only knew how I felt. I felt repelled by them, and I felt very tired. I would like you to sign permission for me to communicate with your sister Helen about Bobby and his situation, I said, turning to the mother, and yours also, turning back to the father. Well, you'll not have mine, he said. I'll not have you taking this out of the family. You acting so superior like you're some kind of judge or something. To the contrary, I explained with cold rationality. What I'm trying to do is my best to keep it in the family as far as possible. Right now, you and Bobby and I are the only people involved. I feel it is necessary to involve Bobby's aunt, at least to the extent necessary to find out if she can be of help. If you tie my hands in doing so, then I will have to discuss the issues thoroughly with my supervisors. I suspect we would conclude we have an obligation to refer Bobby's case to the State Children's Protective Agency. If we do that, then you'll have a real judge on your hands. We may have to do it anyway. It seems to me, however, if she is able to help, that approaching Helen is a way that we can avoid notifying the state. But it's up to you. It's completely your choice whether you want to give me permission to communicate with Helen. Oh, my husband's just being silly, Doctor, Bobby's mother exclaimed with a gay, charming smile. It's just been very upsetting to him to have to see our son in a mental hospital, and we're not used to talking to highly educated people like yourself. Of course we'll sign permission. I have no objection whatsoever to my sister being involved. We want to do whatever we can to help. All we care about is what's best for Bobby. They signed permission and left. That night, my wife and I went to a staff party. I drank a bit more than I ordinarily do. The next day, I got in touch with Aunt Helen. She and her husband came to see me right away. They understood the situation quickly and seemed quite caring. They too were working people, but were willing to have Bobby live with them for as long as his psychiatric care could be paid for. Fortunately, through their employment, Bobby's parents had insurance coverage with unusually good psychiatric benefits. I contacted a most competent psychiatrist in Helen's town who agreed to take on Bobby's case for long-term outpatient psychotherapy. Bobby himself had no understanding of why it was necessary for him to live with his aunt and uncle, and I didn't feel he was ready to deal with my real explanation. I simply told him it would be better for him that way. Within a couple of days, Bobby was quite amenable to the change. Indeed, he improved rapidly with several visits from Helen, the prospect of a new living situation, and the care he received from the aides and nurses. By the time he was discharged to Helen's care, 3 weeks after his admission to the hospital, the sores on his arms and hands were only scars, and he was able to joke with the staff. 6 months later, I heard from Helen that he seemed to be doing well and that his grades had come up again. From his psychiatrist, I heard that he had developed a trusting therapeutic relationship, but was only barely beginning to approach facing the psychological reality of his parents and their treatment of him. After that, I had no more follow-up. As to Bobby's parents, I saw them only once more after that initial meeting, and then only for a couple of minutes each time, while Bobby was still in the hospital. That was all that deemed necessary. Whenever a child is brought for psychiatric treatment, it is customary to refer to her or him as the identified patient. By this term, we psychotherapists mean that the parents or other identifiers have labelled the child as a patient, namely, someone who has something wrong and is in need of treatment. The reason we use the term is that we have learned to become sceptical of the validity of this identification process. More often than not, as we proceed with the evaluation of the problem, we discover that the source of the problem lies not in the child, but rather in his or her parents, family, school, or society. Put more simply, we usually find that the child is not as sick as its parents. Although the parents have identified the child as the one requiring correction, it is usually they, the identifiers, who are themselves most in need of correction. They are the ones who should be the patients. This was exemplified in the case of Bobby. Although he was seriously depressed and desperately in need of help, the source, the cause of his depression, lay not in him, but in his parents' behaviour toward him. Although depressed, there was nothing sick about his depression. Any 15-year-old boy would have been depressed in his circumstances. The essential sickness of the situation lay not in his depression, but in the family environment to which his depression was a natural enough response. To children, even adolescents, their parents are like gods. The way their parents do things seem the way they should be done. Children are seldom able to objectively compare their parents to other parents. They are not able to make realistic assessments of their parents' behaviour. Treated badly by its parents, a child will usually assume that it is bad. If treated as an ugly, stupid, second-class citizen, it will grow up with an image of itself as ugly, stupid, and second-class. Raised without love, children come to believe themselves unlovable. We may express this as a general law of child development. Whenever there is a major deficit in parental love, the child will, in all likelihood, respond to that deficit by assuming itself to be the cause of the deficit, thereby developing an unrealistically negative self-image. Bobby, when he first came to the hospital, was literally gouging holes in himself, destroying the surface of himself piece by piece. It was as if he felt there was something bad, something evil inside him, underneath the surface of his skin, and he was digging at himself in order to get it out. Why? If it happens that someone close to us commits suicide, our first response after the initial shock, if we are normally human, with a normal human conscience, will be to wonder what we did wrong. So it must have been for Bobby. In the days immediately following Stuart's death, he would have remembered all manner of little incidents, that only a week before he had called his brother a stupid slob, that a month before he had kicked him in the midst of a fight, that when Stuart picked on him, he often wished that his brother would somehow be removed from the face of the earth. Bobby felt responsible, at least to some degree, for Stuart's death. What should have happened at this point, and what would have happened in a healthy home, would have been for his parents to begin reassuring him. They should have talked with him about Stuart's suicide. They should have explained that even though they themselves did not realise it, Stuart must have been mentally ill. They should have told him that people don't commit suicide because of everyday squabbles or sibling rivalry. They ought to have said that if anyone was responsible, it was they, the parents, the ones who had had the biggest influence on Stuart's life. But as far as I could ascertain, Bobby had been given none of this reassurance. When the reassurance he needed was not forthcoming, Bobby became visibly depressed. His grades fell. At this point, his parents should have rectified this situation. or lacking the insight to do so themselves, should have sought professional help. But they failed to do so, despite its actually having been suggested to them by the school. It was likely that Bobby even interpreted the lack of attention his depression was receiving as a confirmation of his guilt. Of course, no one was concerned about his depression. He felt he deserved it. He deserved to feel miserable. It was appropriate that he should feel guilty. Consequently, by Christmas, Bobby was already judging himself to be an evil criminal. Then, unsolicited, he was given his brother's murder weapon. How was he to understand the meaning of this gift? Was he to think, my parents are evil people, and out of their evil desire my destruction, just as they probably destroyed my brother? Hardly. Nor could he, even with his 15-year-old mind, think to himself, my parents gave me the gun out of a mixture of laziness, thoughtlessness and cheapness, so they don't love me very well. So what? Since he already believed himself to be evil and lacked the maturity to see his parents with any clarity. There was but one interpretation open to him. To believe the gun, an appropriate message telling him, take your brother's suicide weapon and do likewise. You deserve to die. Fortunately, Bobby did not immediately do likewise. He chose what was probably his only other psychological option: to publicly label himself a criminal so that he might be punished for his evil and society might be protected from him by means of his imprisonment. He stole a car. In a very real sense, he stole it, that he might live. All this has been supposition. I had no way of knowing precisely what had occurred in Bobby's mind. First of all, adolescents are the most private people. They are not apt to confide the inner workings of their minds to anyone, much less a strange, frightening, white-coated adult. But even if he had been willing and able to confide in me, Bobby still would not have been able to tell me such things, for his own awareness of them would have been dim indeed. When we are adults, the greatest part of our thought life proceeds on an unconscious level. For children and young adolescents, almost all mental activity is unconscious. They feel, they conclude, and they act with precious little awareness of what they are about. So we must deduce from their behaviour what is going on. Yet we have learned enough to know that such deductions can be remarkably accurate. From such deductions, we can arrive at another law of child development, this one specific to the problem of evil. When a child is grossly confronted by significant evil in its parents, it will most likely misinterpret the situation and believe that the evil resides in itself. When confronted by evil, the wisest and most secure adult will usually experience confusion. Imagine then what it must be like for a naive child who encounters evil in the ones it most loves and upon whom it depends. Add to this the fact that evil people, refusing to acknowledge their own failures, actually desire to project their evil onto others. And it is no wonder that children will misinterpret the process by hating themselves. And no wonder that Bobby was gouging holes in himself. We can see then that Bobby, the identified patient, was not himself so much sick as he was responding, in the way that most children would, in a predictable fashion, to the peculiar evil sickness of his parents. Although identified as the one who had something wrong with him, the locus of evil in the total situation lay not in him, but elsewhere. This is why his most immediate need was not so much for treatment as for protection. Real treatment would come later and would be long and difficult, as it always is for the reversal of a self-image that does not correspond to reality. Let us turn now from the identified patients to the parents, the true source of the problem. Appropriately, they should have been formally identified as the sick ones. They should have been the ones to receive treatment. Yet they did not. Why not? There are 3 reasons. The first and perhaps most compelling is that they did not want it. To receive treatment, one must want it, at least on some level, and to want it, one must consider oneself to be in need of it. One must, at least on some level, acknowledge his or her imperfection. There are an enormous number of people in this world with serious and identifiable psychiatric problems who, in a psychiatrist's eyes, are quite desperately in need of treatment, but who fail to recognise this need. So they don't get treatment. even when it is offered on a silver platter. Not all such people are evil. In fact, the vast majority are not. But it is into this category of persons most intensely resistant to psychiatric treatment that the thoroughly evil fall. Bobby's parents gave many indications that they would have rejected any type of therapy I might have offered them. They did not even pretend to demonstrate any guilt over Stuart's suicide. They reacted only with rationalization and belligerence to my intimations that they had been remiss in not earlier seeking professional help for Bobby, and that their judgment had been poor at best in their choice of his Christmas present. Although I sensed in them no genuine desire to care for Bobby, the idea that it would be better for him to live elsewhere was anathema to them because of the implied criticism of their ability as parents. Rather than acknowledging any deficit, they refused to assume any blame on the grounds that they were, quote-unquote, working people. Still, I might at least have offered them therapy, just because in all probability they would have rejected the offer. This was insufficient reason not to make it, not to at least make the attempt to help them grow toward understanding and compassion. But I sense that even if by some miracle they had been willing to undergo psychotherapy, in their case it would have failed. It is a sad state of affairs, but the fact of the matter is that the healthiest people, the most honest, whose patterns of thinking are least distorted, are the very ones easiest to treat with psychotherapy and most likely to benefit from it. Conversely, the sicker patients, the more dishonest in their behaviour and distorted in their thinking, the less able we are to help them with any degree of success. When they are very distorted and dishonest, it seems impossible. Among themselves, therapists will not infrequently refer to a patient's psychopathology as being overwhelming. We mean this literally. We literally feel overwhelmed by the labyrinth mass of lies and twisted motives and distorted communication into which we will be drawn if we attempt to work with such people in the intimate relationship of psychotherapy. We feel, usually quite accurately, that not only will we fail in our attempts to pull them out of the morass of their sickness, but that we may also be pulled down into it ourselves. We are too weak to help such patients, too blind to see an end to the twisted corridors into which we will be led, too small to maintain our love in the face of their hatred. This was the case in dealing with Bobby's parents. I felt overwhelmed by the sickness I sensed in them. Not only would they likely reject any offer I made to help them, but I also knew I lacked the power to succeed in any attempt at healing. There is one other reason I didn't try to work with Bobby's parents. I simply didn't like them. It was even more than that. They revolted me. To help people in psychotherapy, it is necessary to have at least a germ of positive feeling for them, a touch of sympathy for their predicaments, a smidgen of empathy for their sufferings, a certain regard for their personhood and hope for their potentials as human beings. I didn't feel these things. I could not envision sitting with Bobby's parents hour after hour, week after week, month after month, dedicating myself to their care. To the contrary, I could hardly stand being in the same room with them. I felt unclean in their presence. I couldn't get them out of my office fast enough. From time to time, I will attempt to work with someone whose case I suspect to be hopeless, on the off chance that my judgment is wrong, and for the learning value to me, if nothing else. But not Bobby's parents. Not only would they have rejected my therapy, I rejected them. People have feelings about each other. When psychotherapists have feelings about their patients, they label those feelings countertransference. Countertransference can run the whole gamut of human emotions, from the most intense love to the most intense hatred. Volumes have been written on the subject of countertransference. It can be either extremely helpful or extremely hurtful to therapeutic relationships. If therapist feelings are inappropriate, the countertransference will distort, confuse, and sidetrack the healing process. Should the countertransference be an appropriate one, however, it can be the most useful tool there is to understand a patient's problem. A crucial task of any psychotherapist is to recognize whether the countertransference is or is not appropriate. To fulfill this task, therapists must continually analyze themselves as well as their patients. If the countertransference is inappropriate, it is the therapist's responsibility to either heal himself or herself, or refer the patient to another therapist, one capable of being more objective in that particular case. The feeling that a healthy person often experiences in a relationship with an evil one is revulsion. The feeling of revulsion may be almost instant if the evil encountered is blatant. If the evil is more subtle, the revulsion may develop only gradually as the relationship with the evil one slowly deepens. The feeling of revulsion can be extremely useful to a therapist. It can be a diagnostic tool par excellence. It can signify more truly and rapidly than anything else that the therapist is in the presence of an evil human being. Yet, like a sharp scalpel, it is a tool that must be used with the greatest care. Should the revulsion result not from something in the patient, but from some sickness in the therapist, all manner of harm will likely be done unless the therapist is humble enough to recognise it as his or her own problem. But what would make revulsion a healthy response? Why might it be an appropriate countertransference for an emotionally healthy therapist? Revulsion is a powerful emotion that causes us to immediately want to avoid, to escape the revolting presence. And that is exactly the most appropriate thing for a healthy person to do under ordinary circumstances when confronted with an evil presence. To get away from it. Evil is revolting because it is dangerous. It will contaminate or otherwise destroy a person who remains too long in its presence. Unless you know very well what you are doing, the best thing you can do when faced with evil is to run the other way. The revulsion countertransference is an instinctive or, if you will, God-given and saving early warning radar system. Despite the volume of professional literature on the subject of countertransference, I have never read anything in it specifically about revulsion. There are several reasons for this absence. The revulsion countertransference is so specific to evil, it is hardly possible to write about one without the other. And since evil has been generally thus far off limits to psychiatric investigation, so has this specific countertransference. Moreover, psychotherapists are usually kindly people, and such a dramatically negative reaction on their part would be rather threatening to their self-image. Then, because of the intense negativity of the reaction, there is a profound tendency for psychotherapists to avoid sustaining relationships with evil clients. Finally, as I have mentioned, very few evil people are willing to be psychotherapy clients in the first place, except under extraordinary circumstances. They will do everything possible to flee the light-shedding process of therapy. So it has been difficult for psychotherapists to get together with evil people long enough to study them or their own reactions. There is another reaction that the evil frequently engender in us: confusion. Describing an encounter with an evil person, one woman wrote, "It was as if I'd suddenly lost my ability to think." Once again, this reaction is quite appropriate. Lies confuse. The evil are the people of the lie, deceiving others as they also build a layer upon layer of self-deception. If confused in response to a patient, the therapist must wonder if this is not the result of her or his own ignorance. But it also behooves the therapist to question, could the patient be doing something to confuse me? My work with the case described in Chapter 4 was ineffective for months because I failed to ask this question. I have stated that the revulsion countertransference is an appropriate, even saving response to evil people. There is one exception. If the confusion can be penetrated, if the diagnosis of evil can be made, and if the therapist, knowing with what he or she is dealing, decides to attempt to relate with the evil person in a healing manner, then, and only then, the revulsion countertransference can and should be set aside. That is a lot of ifs. The attempt to heal the evil should not be lightly undertaken. It must be done from a position of remarkable psychological and spiritual strength. The only reason that it can be done at all is that a therapist who is in a position of such strength will know that while the evil people are still to be feared, they are also to be pitied for ever fleeing the light of self-exposure and the voice of their own conscience. They are the most frightened of human beings. They live their lives in sheer terror. They need not be consigned to any hell. They are already in it. It is therefore not only for the sake of society, but also for their own sakes, that the attempt should be made to rescue the evil from their living hell. Knowing so little about the nature of evil, we currently lack the skill to heal it. Our therapeutic ineptness is hardly remarkable, however, in view of the fact that we have not even yet discerned evil as a specific disease. It is a thesis of this book that evil can be defined as a specific form of mental illness and should be subject to at least the same intensity of scientific investigation that we would devote to some other major psychiatric disease. It is natural and wise that under ordinary circumstances we should steer clear of the viper's den. Yet it is also proper that the scientist, the experienced hepatologist, should approach that very same place in order to learn, to obtain venom for the development of an antitoxin that will serve to protect humankind, and perhaps even to assist the serpent in its evolution. Serpents can grow wings to become dragons, and dragons can be tamed to become simultaneously fierce and gentle servants of God. If we can see the evil as ill and pitiable, albeit still dangerous, and if we know what we are doing, it is appropriate that we should transform our revulsion into careful compassion so as to approach them in healing. As I review the case of Bobby and his parents after a span of 20 years, I doubt that I would today, with all my additional experience, handle the case much differently. I would still envision it as my initial task to rescue Bobby from his parents, and I would still resort, as I did then, to the use of temporal power to accomplish that task. I have learned something in 20 years that would suggest that evil people can be rapidly influenced by any means other than raw power. They do not respond, at least in the short run, to either gentle kindness or any form of spiritual persuasion with which I am familiar. But one thing has changed in 20 years. I know now that Bobby's parents were evil. I did not know it then. I felt their evil, but had no name for it. My supervisors were not able to help me name what I was facing. The name did not exist in our professional vocabulary. As scientists rather than priests, we were not supposed to think in such terms. To name something correctly gives us a certain amount of power over it. At the time I saw Bobby's parents, I did not know the nature of the force with which I was dealing. I was revolted by it, but not curious about it. I avoided dealing with them not simply out of a healthy respect for that force, but also because I was afraid of it, unknowingly afraid. Today I am afraid of it still, but it is not a blind fear. Knowing its name, I know something of the dimensions of that force. Because I have that much of safe ground on which to stand, I can afford to be curious as to its nature. I can afford to move toward it, so I would do something differently today. Having succeeded in getting Bobby out of his parents' home, I would, if I had the opportunity today, attempt to gently tell them, in the vaguest of terms, that they were possessed by a kind of force destructive not only to their children, but also to themselves. And if I happened to have the available time and energy, I would offer to work with them in an attempt to conquer that force. If by some remote chance they agreed, I would proceed to work with them, not because I would like them better now, not even because I would have significant confidence in my power to heal them, but simply because, knowing the name, I have grown strong enough to do the learning and attempt the work. And it is our task to work the fields that we know. Wow. That is the end of that section entitled Bobby's Parents. Yeah, or the story of Bobby. This is still chapter 2, page 76. I'm going to pause here. The next section is called Evil and Sin. But what I want to do is have a ramble on about what I've read so far. It's not... I've studied psychology, so that helps me to understand a lot of it. So I'm going to use my very little training in psychology to just ramble on about what I've read so far before I continue to read on, so that all the listeners are on the same page. Thanks for listening.